Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, and welcome to Thresehold of Hope. I'm Father Mitch Pacwa, and this is a program where we go through various documents of the church. Before we get to the document, I just want to mention that today is the feast of St. Barnabas. St. Barnabas was someone who was very early disciple. As a matter of fact, he's even called an apostle. And he sold all of his property and committed himself to serving in the church. And he was the one who recognized that St. Paul might be able to be trusted, and also went up to Antioch and told the community back in Jerusalem that it was okay to trust the Gentile converts, and he got Paul to help him, and then he and Paul joined up at the request of the church in Antioch, and they went over there to go ahead and be able to preach the gospel around Asia Minor. So St. Barnabas is one of the great saints. He's mentioned quite a bit in Acts of the Apostles, mentioned first in chapter 4, but especially from chapters 9 through 15. Very prominent character along with St. Paul. All right, let's now take a look at our document. We are going through Fides et Ratio, which means faith and reason. Now you can get a paperback copy of this from the Daughters of St. Paul. Their email address is www.pauline.org. And at their online store, just type in Fides et Ratio, and you can order through them. Also, if you prefer, you can download a free electronic copy of Fides et Ratio in the document library at our website, EWTN.com. Go to where it says Faith tab, and then you click that, you'll see the libraries. And in the library is the document library, and you can go there and just type in Fides et Ratio, and you can download that into your computer to either read from your computer with us or print it out for yourselves. Also, if you want to look at past programs, go to where it says EWTN live shows, and then click on Thresehold of Hope, and you'll see what we've already been discussing. All right, now we'd love to have you participate in our show. One way is to do as these nice folks have done, is come all the way here to Birmingham, Alabama, and be part of our live studio audience. Also, you can send us your question by writing to thresehold@ewtn.com, or you can also call during our live broadcast, which is at 2 p.m. on Tuesdays, Eastern Time, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Adjust that for your own time zone on Tuesdays. And the number you can call is 1-800-221-9460. Or you can go to, if you're here in Birmingham, or if you're outside the country, you can call 205-271-2980. All right. Now we are on paragraph 5.1. Still in the introduction. And we're going through this slowly because it is very rich, somewhat dense, but very important. And today's section, in paragraph 5, is a very important one for us to look at. Now, he says that the church sets a very great value on the drive of reason to help make life more worthy. Being able to use our minds is part of what makes human life more worth living. And again, distinguishes us from the animals as much as we love them. I think I mentioned last week, when I'm sitting reading a book, my cat will come onto my lap, not to read with me, but to scratch her ear with the edge of my book. As far as she's concerned, that's all that a book is good for. and otherwise it's incomprehensible. But we can take a look and read the book and understand life better because we have a mind that knows how to think, and that's good. The church sees in philosophy the way to come to know fundamental truths about human life. You know, for instance, philosophy helps us think about values. You apply the basic principle that not only our Lord Jesus Christ, but cultures around the world have said, don't do to others what you don't want them to do to you. Christ made it a positive statement, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But in most societies, it's framed in a negative way. And from that comes a lot of the basic thinking about what is right and wrong. And, you know, again, nobody wants to get robbed. Thieves don't like to be stolen from. And then philosophy would say that you go ahead and not steal from others. If you don't like it done to you, don't do it to somebody else. And there are lots of other things. This is just a small example. So the church considers philosophy an indispensable help for a deeper understanding of the faith. Faith and philosophy are not opposed to each other. Some philosophers are opposed to the faith, but that's a choice that they make based on some of their principles. But the church does not see philosophy as a problem, but as a help to deeper understanding. And when you study theology, you should know some philosophy because most theologians use ideas from philosophers as a tool. See, that's one of the things you need to understand. The church understands philosophy as something of a tool to help you think logically about the faith. That's one of the goals. And that's why the church likes philosophy very much. And philosophy also helps to communicate the gospel of Christ. It's, again, not opposed, but we want to use philosophy to help people, especially those who don't know anything about the gospel, to help them think about what is revealed. So that's part of our goal. Now, the Pope knows that other popes before him have tried to reflect on the role of human reason and how important it is for human beings to be able to think. And he wrote this encyclical because he saw a problem in the modern world in which a lot of people neglect the search for ultimate truth. Now that's very important. A lot of philosophers do not think that you can find out the ultimate meaning of life. A lot of them deny it. Matter of fact, you even have a lot of philosophers who deny that reason is even reasonable. B.F. Skinner would be an example of someone who did that. He was a psychologist, but he was using certain types of philosophy. So this is something that he wants to analyze. Now he says, on one hand, modern philosophy does a lot of work to help focus attention on human beings. What does it mean to be human? That is a question. And in fact, by modern philosophy, he doesn't just mean in the last 50 years or 100 years. Philosophy started in the time before Socrates. And therefore, modern philosophy begins in the 1600s AD. So different perspective. A lot of us don't think of that as modern, but in philosophy that's called classical modern philosophy. The questions that were brought up by Rene Descartes, and then in the 1700s by other philosophers like David Hume in Scotland, very influential philosopher, and others as well. So this is what he means by modern philosophy, and the focus is on what does it mean to be human. Before that, philosophy focused a lot on the nature of God and the nature of being. When you say that something is, what does that mean? Say that something exists. What is existence? And then talking about that in terms of who God is and how everything can exist. That was earlier type of question. Modern philosophy focuses on humanity. And with this as a starting point, a lot of questions have arisen in modern philosophy. They try to deal with a number of things, and a number of very complex systems of thought have developed. You have to, if you get a chance to have an introduction to philosophy, you'll see there's some very rich thought, but it can be kind of complex. If you've never read any philosophers, one of the best people to explain the history of philosophy and go through individual philosophers is, in fact, a Jesuit priest named Father Frederick Copleston. He was an Englishman, I believe. And Father Copleston wrote an absolutely incredible history of philosophy. And he was very good at laying out what the philosophers said. He was so good at it that Father Copleston's history of philosophy is still one of the standard sets of books in philosophy courses anywhere. He was clear. He didn't say what he agreed or disagreed with always. He just laid out what philosophers taught. And that's a very useful introduction if we want to find out about more philosophers. And, with these various systems of thought, a variety of different fields of knowledge developed. And we have to admit that there's been a tremendous amount of knowledge learned over the past 200, 300 years. In the 1700s, I don't think they even could isolate 10 elements in the universe. They could barely, I don't think it was as many as 10. I think it was less than that. And then you think today how much science has advanced. And it's because some of the ways philosophers thought about how you know things and how you do experiments and what is science, developing in those 1700s, helped us learn a lot more about science, technology, engineering, and it's just been an amazing thing. And the Pope obviously commends that development of culture and history, anthropology. Now, when we've seen this before with Pope John Paul, when he talks about anthropology, he is not speaking so much about the study of ancient human forms and ancient human societies. When we think, I took anthropology when I was a freshman in college. I loved it very much, by the way. I thought it was just a great course. But I have to admit, the only reason I took it is that it counted for a science class, the science requirement. And I didn't even know what the word anthropology meant. All I knew is it was not biology or chemistry or math. So I figured I can try. And then I ended up really enjoying anthropology a lot. For one time anyway, my ignorance served me well. But anthropology, what the Pope means is a study of what does it mean to be human. Anthropos is a Greek word meaning human being. So anthropology is the study of what it means to be human, as opposed to non-humans like animals and such. Also, there's been great work in logic. Now, he would know about that because, in fact, at the university he attended before World War II began, the Jagiellonian University in Krakow, Poland, they were the leaders in symbolic logic, a whole school of philosophy that had tremendous impact on engineering, for instance. They came up with all, especially electrical engineering uses them. I remember taking a course in logic and symbolic logic, and it was all full of engineers because they used it quite a bit. So, and it was a school that really was well advanced, but then in 1939 stopped. The Nazis executed all the professors, and that was the end of that. Also, we've seen, as I mentioned, great development in natural sciences. I think it's only been since an Augustinian priest invented the science of genetics back in the late 1800s that it's developed to what it is today. And now, even the priest had no idea what DNA was. Now look at what's developed. And we're learning so much about that. Also, the study of history. Again, it was in the 19th century, the 1800s, that discoveries in the ancient Near East were made. So that only in the 1820s, Champollion learned how to translate Egyptian hieroglyphics. And then 20 years later, in the 1840s, Akkadian and then Persian were also translated. Nobody even knew how to read their alphabets before the 1840s. It had been forgotten for millennia. And brilliant people, studied that. So we learned a lot about linguistics and how languages work, as well as history and on and on and on. So that the whole universe of knowledge has been developed quite a bit in the last couple hundred years. And modern philosophy helped give us tools for understanding how these various sciences work. And that's great. But on the other side, despite all these very positive results from philosophy, good things that we learn, there's also a one-sided quality to this in the modern world. And the one-sidedness is that so much of philosophy focuses on what human beings are, what it's like to be a subject. So that's why he talks about this as human subjectivity. What do I feel? So we've also seen in this a development of psychology. Now, you don't see psychology as a science before the 1800s, do you? There just wasn't. Why? Because philosophy in the earlier centuries was not so interested in what I think as a subject. It was interested in the objective world. But philosophy, beginning in the 1600s and later, began to say, well, we're not so sure we can know the objective world. So let's focus on what we can know, which is human subjects, individuals. And so trying to understand the subject is something that was very important in modern science. But if you focus on the individual subject and the individual person, you put yourself at a risk of forgetting about what goes beyond me. You know, and this is against human nature. Humans have a desire, a craving for something beyond themselves. It's one of the reasons human beings have explored the world. We always want to know what's beyond the horizon. We want to go visit places we've never seen before. We want to understand the heavens. We want to understand, the stars and the galaxies and such. We want something beyond us. And just closing in on ourselves is a risk. That's what he's concerned about. Especially if human beings so focus on themselves that they don't go beyond themselves to the importance of other people. They don't think about society at large. And they don't think about God. They close themselves off. And a lot of people so focus on their own subjectivity that they don't consider God. They end up cutting themselves off from that truth that's beyond them. I just want to know what I can know. I'm not interested in what's out there beyond me. Just what can I experience instead of what reality might be. And when you do that, you set up a problem. Then you start going for fads. If you don't care about what is true in itself, just because it's true, you can easily start chasing after fads, what he calls caprice. You just have this sense that you have pragmatic criteria. What can I get done? How can I make money off of this? How can I get more possessions? Or how can I get more power? How can I put myself in control? And that's all I care about. Instead of what is true in itself, I'm going to not only be at the mercy of caprice, as he says, but one of the things is that we'll end up thinking, well, if I can do something technologically, if I can find the technology to accomplish something, then it's okay if I do it. Is that so? I don't think so. Just because, we've seen this debate very recently. Just because our scientists can isolate embryonic stem cells, as an example, does that mean we should kill babies in the womb to take their stem cells? Just because a government can eliminate all the people that disagree with the government, as happened in the Soviet Union and communist China, and still goes on in North Korea and elsewhere. Just because the government can eliminate you, does that mean that they should? I don't think so. So having the technology to accomplish something doesn't mean that you should do it. All you can say is, I know how to do this, but I have to say no to some things. But then here's the question. On what basis do I not misuse my technology? As a matter of fact, even the way I put the question, think about that. If I say I would be misusing gas if I used it to eliminate the Jews, because the government doesn't want the Jews to exist. So if we use gas to eliminate the Jews, is that wrong? Am I misusing the gas? The gas may have a good purpose, but that's not it. But how can I determine that the use of gas to kill the Jews is wrong? I have to have basic principles beyond just saying, well, I can, I guess I should. That's not enough. I have to have basic principles by which I say the Jews have inherent value that comes to them in their dignity as human beings. And I share the same humanity with them as I do with everybody else. Therefore, I may not use this. Now, I have to keep in mind, Hitler claimed to be using science. He was basing some of his opinions on certain statements of Charles Darwin that certain groups are subhuman. Darwin, for instance, taught that Africans were subhuman and that they needed to be eliminated. But he didn't want to do it by murdering them. He just wanted them to be bred out. Whereas Hitler said, oh, I can speed it up because I think that Jews are subhuman. Well, then, see, now how do you answer that? Unless you have an ability to say, this is what it means to be human, and this is not. I can't determine if a group is subhuman unless I have the question of what it means to be human. And this is where philosophy comes into play. Because it's not just what I can do by technology, but it's what I ought to do because I think about what is right and wrong. And I avoid the wrong and choose the good, as is basic in all of ethics, all of philosophy. So, therefore, we have to see that reason, the ability to think, may not avoid the orientation to truth. Again, a basic principle. Nobody likes being lied to. And I've never enjoyed being lied to, and I don't think anybody else I know likes it either. And that is itself an indicator. We are made for the truth. The fact that we don't want to be lied to means that we're made for the truth. Therefore, what the Pope is saying is that we need to have an orientation to the truth and not let the abundance of knowledge. See, there's so many facts out there, so many things we know that none of us can master. And we can't let all of that knowledge, all that data, I mean, they're now making huge computers to store data of all kinds. And that should not stop us from seeking what is true, to gaze beyond just what we call facts, to understand the meaning of life. And that instead of just focusing on the fact that we do know things, modern philosophy needs to use the ability to know the truth and not just go by what one or other human mind can grasp, but what is the truth beyond the facts that makes sense out of all the facts? How do we pull it together? That's where philosophical wisdom comes in. When you go beyond just the individual facts, but you begin pulling it together and making sense out of what you know, making sense out of life, making sense out of reality. That's what the Pope is saying philosophy needs to do. All right, we're going to take a little break. We'll be back in a couple minutes with questions from you and from our studio audience. So please stay with us. Welcome back. We have a nice group of folks here with us. We'd love to have you as part of our studio audience as well. If you can, please contact our pilgrimage department. Their number is 205-271-2966. 205-271-2966, or go to the website www.EWTN.com. And this is something that that'll help you with knowing the schedules for masses, programs. They'll also give you information about places you can stay nearby, places you can eat. Now, you have a couple here from Buffalo. I've gone over to their hometown and eaten the famous buffalo wings, for which they are so well known. And again, I went to the original place where the little Italian lady invented them. Now you have to come here and eat some Alabama barbecue or fried green tomatoes. Though we have some folks in Carolina, they might have a different idea of barbecue than we do. But we'd love to have you all join us. So please come on down. All right, let's start off with the caller. Hello, Anthony?
Yes.
Hi, where are you from?
I'm from Atlantic City, New Jersey.
Oh, good to have you here. And what's your question?
Father, my question is, in the Old Testament, it says that the prophet Elijah was taken up into heaven, body and soul, in a fiery chariot. My understanding was that the Catholic Church teaches the first person in heaven, body and soul, was Jesus Christ, and the second was the Blessed Virgin. What is your understanding of that passage?
Well, I'm going to ask you, Anthony, to take a look at the second book of Kings, chapter 2 and following, where you see that story about Elijah. And at the time, his number one disciple was Elisha. And Elisha witnessed it. But the other prophets who were there were these schools of prophets. In fact, they were called the sons of the prophets. Not that they were physically sons, it's just what they called a community. And that the prophet was the spiritual father of that community. So the sons of the prophets said, well, what if he went someplace else? And Elisha said, no, he didn't. And the sons of the prophets said, we're going to go look. And they went looking, and they couldn't find him. And so they very much tried to think that it was figurative or something that maybe was a vision or something. But they said it was, that he really was gone. Now, here's the thing. He did not and here's one of the differences between Elijah and Jesus Christ. Jesus, our Lord, died, was buried, and rose from the dead, and then ascended into heaven. Not just with the physical body, but a glorified physical body. That was something Elijah could not do, and that he did not in any way experience. So there's a major difference between Elijah and Christ. And it doesn't, one of the other things too, it doesn't say that Elijah was in the heaven of paradise where he'd see God, just that he's taken up. Whereas Christ opens up heaven by his death and resurrection, and he brings all the other saints of the Old Testament with him into heaven. And that's one of the other aspects of the church teaching. So that they oftentimes spoke about the place where the ancient, the pre-Christian saints of the Old Testament went. And that they were not in heaven, where they could see God. They were outside. And apparently he's there. But it's no accident that one of the two people that appears at the transfiguration is Elijah, along with Moses. And there's a lot more to that too. If you're interested in taking a look more at that, get a hold of the video that I did on the transfiguration. You can get that from EWTN Religious Catalog. We did that on Mount Tabor, but also on Mount Sinai. I went up to Mount Sinai, and I believe in there I was also at the church that's built over the site of that they believed Elijah was assumed into heaven. So take a look at that. That might give you some more to reflect on. I have a question from our studio audience. Ma'am, where are you from?
Me?
Yes.
I'm from Denmark, Wisconsin, just out of Green Bay, and just a short ways from Champion, where Sister Adele had the Blessed Mother appeared to Sister Adele. Yes.
And your question?
How can they, they say the Blessed Mother appeared to her.
No, you're asking about philosophy before?
The philosophy before.
Yeah.
Well, I wondered how can you, when you're talking to somebody, they sound so, but then when you find out about it, it doesn't mean anything. Good
question. So that you can hear somebody talk about certain ideas, and they sound very convincing, but then later on you find out there's nothing to it. This is a very common experience. You take a look at, we talked before about Hitler. He was very convincing, and the communists in the Soviet Union were very convincing. But then we saw how they both ended up destroying not only their enemies, but their own people, so that their philosophy didn't hold true. But then on a less dramatic approach, one of the things about dealing with somebody else's philosophy is that you need to ask them good questions. This is, again, why each of us has our own mind. And, not just questions to be antagonistic. That's not what I would necessarily call a good question. A question that really wants to understand what the other person means. And helping them, sometimes you're actually helping them to clarify their own ideas. That's not a bad thing. You don't need to be afraid to do that. But oftentimes, especially if you become more skilled at using philosophy, using logic, a lot of times it's not just that you show they're wrong and I'm right. No. The issue is you think through the issues, and sometimes you help the other person realize, oh, I never thought about that. And that's a good part of authentic thinking. It's not just a debating society. We say, I'm right, you're wrong, but you actually learn how to help each other think better. And that's where good questions are absolutely essential. And the better you ask a question, the clearer the answer will be. It's one of the most important things. I used to say this to my students all the time, that you have to learn to ask good questions if you want to get a good answer. If you ask a question that's too broad or a question that's too limited, you may not find out as much. But you want to make your questions to help understand somebody else's logic and your own. And that's a very good thing to do. All right, we have another caller. Hello, Mike.
Hello, Father Mitch. How are you today?
Fine, thanks. Where are you from?
I'm from Lindenville, Vermont.
Good to have you. And what's your question?
Well, my question is about in James chapter 1. I've just never been able to understand, dealing with people and circumstances, the difference between temptation and testing of faith. I know God doesn't test or tempt anybody or can't be tempted, but situations I just don't seem to make them correctly. Can you help me with that?
Yeah, let's stay on the line, okay? I'll make sure that I understand what you're talking about. In general, the way that we talk about the difference between testing your faith and a temptation is that a temptation tries to get you to do something that is sinful. That's generally where a temptation goes. It tries to move you towards a sinful act, whereas testing is something that tries to see the strength of what you have. Say in the case of faith, you test, that's not that you try to test your faith, but your faith gets tested by various experiences. Death of a loved one can test your faith in the sense seeing how strong your faith might be. And as you stay focused through a testing of faith, you find that the testing actually strengthens us. And a good example, when somebody works out with weights, you actually exhaust the muscles. And as you do that, that helps to strengthen the muscles. You push it to the limit, and then your muscles get stronger. Does that help? Maybe we lost.
Is the difference, like you said, between temptation of faith and the testing of sin?
Right. Well, no. Temptation to sin, testing of faith. So a temptation to sin is something that gets you to try to deviate. So just to use my example of testing your muscles by lifting weights as much as you can, versus a temptation which says, don't go to the gym, but sit here and eat cake. That would be a temptation. Whereas testing your muscles would be to say, I'm going to see how much I can lift and go to the limit. Does that help a little bit better?
Oh, yes. I'm actually watching you, but I just, like you said, I've asked other people, and I just never able to apply it to daily life.
Sure. Now, and one of the things that you'll see is that at times the temptation will be like Christ in the desert. The devil offered him good things, bread in the wilderness. You're hungry. Want some bread? Do a nice miracle for yourself, tempting him to do something he was not sent to do. Whereas, in other situations, we get tested in order to be made stronger. And not to do anything bad, but to strengthen what we do have. So that would be testing. Okay? All right. Let's go to another question in the studio audience. Ma'am, where are you from?
From Brisbane, Australia, Father.
Good. It's a beautiful town.
Not bad.
I've been there, and I remember the absolutely stunning jacaranda trees, along your river. That's just beautiful.
They are beautiful. Yeah.
And your question?
I was wondering, Father, what principles would a philosopher have that would preclude him from having a religious pathway in life?
Sure. A very important question. Now, one of the things I would have to say, in terms of what would preclude a philosopher from believing in God, okay, that is going to vary by philosopher. So there are a variety of types of atheism. So, for example, you have somebody like Nietzsche. Nietzsche thought that if you have faith in God, it will make you weak because you depend on God. And his goal was for the Übermensch, the Superman, and that we need to have the strength and the power to make our own decisions to do what we want, and that faith weakens you. Now, that goes back to our last question, because on one hand, you look at people who have stayed with the faith, and someone like Maximilian Kolbe, who gave up his life. Now, was that weakness to exchange his life for the life of somebody with a family? Nietzsche might say so, but he's got his own definition of what it means to be Superman, and what it means to be strong, and what it means to be weak. And that would be the kind of question that you then have to ask Nietzsche and others. Okay? And then also, there are some people who would say, how can there be anything beyond the physical? And again, they just assume there can't be anything except the physical. That would be, say, someone like Stalin. Stalin even wanted to say that there was a soul, but it was material. And everything in the world was material. And he certainly derived that from Marx. So you've got presuppositions, in other words, basic starting principles. And then, and this is always key, it goes back to the question asked with this lady here, to have some of those basic starting principles questioned. And if you just dismiss, as a matter of a good example again would be Marx. Marx said, I dismiss the religious because he assumed that religion was opium for the people, instead of something that challenged them to be greater. Now, he may not have seen anything particularly worthwhile in the religious people he knew. I don't know that. I don't know enough about his life. But also, I do know that there was a lot in his life that was very, very nasty. You know, Mark's had a very nasty personal life. And it could also be that he was afraid that if there is a God, he was in trouble because of the nasty way he treated his family, for instance. He wasn't very kind to his children by any means, by any means. So, you know, but you have to, you know, this is where you would ask somebody. Now, we can't really ask Marx because he's dead. But this is where we challenge people. And I've had wonderful conversations with a number of atheists I've known over the years. I was in one discussion, the gentleman didn't know that I was a priest. And we were discussing, we were at, matter of fact, we were at a place where we were swimming. So I just, you know, swimming talks and all. And at the end of it said, you ought to be a priest. Well, beats it to it. But because he was a Marxist, and I challenged his materialistic assumptions by pushing them to their logical conclusions, which he had not done. So that's one of the things that we do. By the more we think, the more of a service we provide to helping others think. That's a positive thing. We have another caller. Hello, Carol?
Yes, hi, Father.
Hi,
Thank
where
you
you
for
from?
taking my call.
Yeah, where are you from?
California.
Oh, great. And what's your question?
My question is, I have two children. One is a practicing Catholic, goes to church and follows all the rules of the faith. My other one, but he doesn't seem as respectful of others. Now, my other one is very respectful of her spouse. They seem, I mean, they're always on, you know, on the same wavelength, but not a practicing Catholic. And I've had this conflict for a while. I do pray every day that both of the issues, you know, get straightened out, but I wanted to hear from a priest what your feelings would be.
Sure, a couple things. First of all, being disrespectful is not something that you learn by the faith. You bring that with your own personality. And, you know, one of the things, I'll never forget what Sister Ida said to us in 8th grade. When one of the boys, he was sort of the biggest troublemaker in our 8th grade class. And some of the other people in the class said, did you see that he went to Holy Communion today? And Sister Ida hit the ceiling. She says, how dare you criticize him? You don't know what's in his soul, and you don't know how much worse his struggle to be virtuous would be if he didn't go to Holy Communion. He might be far nastier if he wasn't getting these graces, and you don't know what he's struggling with, which is true. And this is one of the things I would, you know, challenge your son first to deal with. You know, Christ does not teach us disrespect. And you might be right on a lot of things, but that's still not warrant to be disrespectful. And besides that, I'm your mother, and I know what you're up to, as moms usually do. And, you know, so keep on challenging him on that. But in terms of your daughter, to appreciate that the good that is in her personality, in her character structure, because you're dealing with two character structures, and they're both very different, as you know better than I. And what you want to say is, look, the goodness in your daughter's character will be further perfected by a growth in her love of Christ and sharing that gift with the church, so that she can grow in that and help a lot of other people because of her virtue. Whereas your son just needs to be challenged to integrate what he believes with the way he acts. And that's a constant thing for all of us. One of the things I've got to realize is that we've run out of time, so I'll act accordingly. May Almighty God bless you and keep you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. And again, I want to remind you that this program is brought to you by you. This is your network. always has been since it began. And so please keep us in between your gas bill, your electric bill, and your cable bill, and we will be able to pay our bills too. Thank you.